Os presento mínimamente a Neil Mendoza. El trabajo de Neil Mendoza combina escultura, electrónica y software para dar vida a objetos y espacios inanimados. Explora temas como lo absurdo, lo humorístico, lo inútil y lo surrealista. Ha impartido conferencias por medio mundo como en UCLA, en Stanford y en varias universidades por todo el mundo, así como su obra artística que ha viajado por los diferentes festivales de arte electrónico como el SIGGRAPH, el Ars Electrónica y otro montón de festivales más que no pararía de enumerar. También ha creado instalaciones artísticas digitales para marcas, para clientes, como Adidas, Adobe, Arcade, IBM, Audi, Nokia, Orange, Ford, y si veis en la web, sigue con un montón de clientes bastante exagerado. Como veis, es un creador que sabe combinar lo digital con lo manual, el arte con la industria, lo humano con lo tecnológico. Y bueno, no me alargo mucho más porque mejor que os lo presente él. Con vosotros, Neil Mendoza. Gracias. Thanks.
Hello. Thank you for coming here to listen to me. So yeah, I guess I will get started. I guess Frank introduced me so you know a bit about what I do. So if your past year or two was anything like mine, I think you probably spent far too much time looking at screens like this, interacting with other people via your computer rather than in person. But the pandemic just accelerated a lot of trends that already existed in society. Already people were going to places and starting to mediate their experience of the world through these devices they carry around with them. So it looks like here people are going to see the Mona Lisa, but if you look closely, they're not actually looking at the Mona Lisa. They're looking at their phones, taking a picture of the Mona Lisa. So people are already starting to see everything through digital devices even before they were forced to by the pandemic. And I love digital technology. It gives you amazing powers to do things that have never been possible before. You can sculpt things in 3D and compose music and paint, and if you're a kid, you can start a pizza restaurant in Minecraft. But I use all of these digital technologies in my work, but when you're making everything on a computer, it also takes away something. Like we've evolved to interact with the world in 3 dimensions. Like if I pick up a cup in real life, there's all of these circuits in my brain that are triggering to pick up the cup. And so, but when you use a computer for everything becomes like everything becomes a touch or a swipe, and suddenly we've lost all of these parts of our brain that we've evolved to interact with the world through. There was also a study a few years ago that if you read a book on a Kindle rather than a paper version of the book, you remember much less information. And this makes perfect sense to me. When you have a real book, has a weight and has a color, has a picture on it. Maybe it has a smell, even a taste if you lick it. Whereas if you're reading a book on a Kindle, everything is coming through this plastic rectangle. So you suddenly lost all of these hooks that your brain would normally attach to the information. So here you can see a piece by an artist called Oliver Eliasson. And what he did is he brought back some Arctic ice, and he wanted to confront people directly with what melting Arctic ice looked like. So this was kind of controversial because obviously bringing ice back from the Arctic is itself pretty wasteful of energy, but I think this is a successful project if it changed even like 1 or 2 people's ideas of what ice melting in the Arctic actually is. Because when you're always experiencing ice melting in the Arctic through a screen, it kind of like just becomes homogenized like everything else in reality that you experience through a screen. But when you actually are confronted with something that's cold and wet, it's suddenly a completely different experience. So for me in my work, I try to use digital technology, but also try to add some physicality elements, create social spaces, create experiences that live outside the screen. So creating alternative realities is what I do a lot. And there are already people who are exploring different ways of interacting with digital technology. So this is a place in San Francisco. I can't think of the name of it now. It's just escaped my brain. But they're trying to work out different ways that you can do computing where rather than just experiencing everything through a screen, the computing experience is using the whole room. And it's a social experience, it's a physical experience. So the great thing as artists is, or designers or whatever you want to be, is you have the opportunity to create new realities that live outside the digital reality that's been given to you. So if you create an experience that's convincing enough or compelling enough, then ideally it would start to enter the mainstream and become part of the real reality. So if you if you see it a lot of times with like multi-touch, which now we all take for granted, the first places where people were experiencing multi-touch was through art installations. So if you can create a moving enough experience through an art installation, then it can gradually seep into mainstream reality. So context is very important for me when I'm creating my artwork. So for me, context means the people I surround myself with, because they're the ones who are going to be experiencing it or giving me feedback about what I'm creating, and also the materials I have access to. So that might be, I did a residency in the rubbish dump, so that was a load of trash, or the tools you have access to, like a CNC or a laser cutter or a paintbrush. So these massively shape each piece of work that I make. So the first piece of work that I'm going to talk to you about, I made an artist residency. And at this artist residency, I was in charge of putting the chickens to bed at night. So I was thinking a lot about chickens. And Adobe had asked me to make a project for an exhibition they were doing that was meant to be around mixed reality. And the title of the exhibition was Human Machine. So it got me thinking about the way that human beings tend to treat the world as if it's just an infinite resource to be used and abused by them. And I wanted to make a piece that would be a physical manifestation of this, of the way that we treat nature as a machine at our service. So the idea would be that you would have some virtual natural scenes and you would have a mechanical element which would represent humans to interact with it. So for the human element, I decided to pick hands. Hands are a big trope in art going back all through the ages to represent human beings. So I 3D printed a hand and I started experimenting with different ways that might be able to be moved. So I laser cut some like a couple of pieces of wood, made a basic mechanism, experimented with a few other mechanisms. So in my practice, there's a lot of experimentation. So then after I'd got that first mechanism, I started to develop it further. So the idea was going to be you would have these mechanical elements, and in this rectangle you can see in the center there would be a screen. And hopefully, if it would all work as I expected, the mechanical elements would appear to be interacting with the digital elements. So this piece was going to be 3 separate individual pieces. So the first piece was going to be based around chickens. So I was going to make a piece where you could annoy chickens into laying eggs. Another animal that I kind of like a duck. So I guess human beings tend to leave a lot of trash in duck habitats. So I wanted to make a machine that was a physical interpretation of that. And the last animal I chose for this piece were pugs. I guess pugs have been so inbred by human beings that they can no longer survive without our help. They're kind of, it's hard for them to breathe, hard for them to defend themselves. So I guess it's a, really good example of humans interfering with nature to make something super cute, but also kind of useless, completely dependent on us now. So after I played with these different mechanisms and sourced up these different virtual scenes, I started to design the final pieces. So here's some renderings of what those look like. So these are made in Fusion 360, and Fusion 360 is a really useful piece of CAD software. If you're a student, you can get a free license for. And this is what the final piece looked like. So this machine lets you stroke a pug, and if you try and stroke him too fast, he'll get scared and run away into the corner. So this piece was made with Unity. So each of the machines has like a rotary encoder, which is a type of sensor to read rotation. And then it's talking to a microcontroller. It's a teensy, but it's similar to an Arduino. And then the microcontroller is sending digital signals to a computer. And so there's one computer with 3 screens attached to it, and they're all running one big Unity screen. So I guess one of the challenges here was to try and make it seem convincing that the digital and the physical were interacting with each other. So I had to write some custom code to get the Unity scene to be able to read from the microcontroller fast enough. But people seem to take the bait, and they seem to be convinced that the digital and the physical, were interacting with each other. This piece was really interesting, I think, because it's talking about environmental issues, but it's not just talking about them straight on, it's talking about them from a slightly surreal standpoint. And I think if you're talking about these kind of serious issues, using humor and absurdity is a great way to take a side door into people's brains, because people already know about a lot of these problems in the world. People know there's serious environmental issues and etc. And if you just talk about them directly, people are going to be like, yeah, I know that. But if you take the kind of side road into their brains, talking about them from an angle they're not expecting, I think maybe you can kind of bypass their conscious resistance to thinking about these issues more and connect directly to their subconscious. So anyway, that was that piece, and I guess it wasn't very empowering to the animals, that piece. Kind of like let people abuse these kind of small virtual animals. So for my next piece, I wanted to make a piece that would empower some kind of animal, but then I kind of got sidetracked and decided I wanted to make a piece that would empower animals that were made of bread. So I guess bread is at the mercy of birds. It gets kind of abused and attacked by birds. So I came up with this kind of weird idea that I was going to make these robotic birds out of bread, and when the robotic birds would see real birds arriving, they would fly away. So the real birds were going to be on video, and the robotic birds were going to be robots in a space. So the first stage of this project, I guess, was I needed to get videos of real birds. So this was for a museum, the Children's Museum in Pittsburgh. So I worked with them in their garden to make this bird video machine. So yeah, birds seem to be quite into this bird photo booth. I actually discovered these birds, sparrows, are pretty mean. You have lots of videos of them fighting with each other to get seeds. And there were also lots of other animals who wanted to be in this art piece with me. So yeah, I had lots of squirrel video as well. But anyway, after I got that video footage, the next part of this project was trying to work out how to make robots out of bread. And it turns out bread is not the best material for making robots with, so I'd highly advise against making bread art. But the system I came up with was leaving the bread out to dry for a few days and then covering it with a plastic resin. So it's dry and it's coated in plastic. So hopefully, in theory, it will last for a long time. And the joints I came up with to attach the different bird parts to each other were simple 3D printed elements. So this is my bird assembly line, and here's a finished assembled bird. So the electronics for this were again a microcontroller, a teensy, and then 4 stepper motor drivers, and then this is what this piece looked like when it was all together. So every time the birds would kind of like twitch, the bread birds would get scared, and you'd get like a wave of motion, and they'd fly away from the bird. So technically this the control software for this was written in open frameworks, and then it would like send signals over the network to each of the birds telling it how to move. So aesthetically, this piece I think people enjoyed looking at. They liked the motion, but like conceptually I think it was one level too far removed from reality. Kind of like I think it's good to think about the concepts you're making and make sure they actually make sense to you. I think the problem I had with this was it made sense in my head, but it didn't make sense to other people unless I explained it to them. But I was quite into this whole making animal empowerment art here, so I started thinking about other art that I can make to empower animals, and I came up with a idea of making a machine that would enable hamsters to be able to draw selfies. So why should human beings get all of the selfie love? Why shouldn't the animal kingdom join in too? So at the time when I was making this, I was also thinking about the fact that we just take for granted that we have all of the information ever published more or less at our fingertips in our pockets. Like digital information is crazy. Here you can see a piece by an artist called Michael Mandelberg, where he wanted to give people an idea of the scale of Wikipedia by printing out the whole thing. So it's not actually every page in Wikipedia printed out, because that would obviously be pretty bad for the environment. So he printed out a few and then made wallpaper about the rest. But it kind of gives you an idea of the scale of all this digital information that's just compressed and held on servers. So for this piece, I decided I wanted this hamster selfie machine to not use digital information to encode the hamster selfie. I started thinking about ways that I could make this hamster selfie machine completely mechanical. And what you can see here is a cam on the screen. And I guess before there were digital computers, a lot of computing was done mechanically like this. And also like a lot of the automata from the 18th century used similar mechanisms to this, where you would encode information physically. So I wrote some software where you would be able to feed it a drawing, and then the software would calculate the shape of the machine that would need to be created in order to create this drawing. So I was kind of trying to create a machine to make a drawing, but in order to work out what shape the machine needed to be, I traced the drawing. So I was kind of running the machine backwards. So once I exported these kind of curvy shapes from this software I wrote, I cut them out of wood using a CNC machine and then created this machine. So this is a video of a hamster. To me, this is very obviously a small screen, but I've shown this in a few different places now, and there's like grown-ups, you know, like 40, 50-year-olds coming up to me being like, how do you take care of the hamster in a gallery like this? Isn't it mean? I'm like, it's not actually a hamster. But yeah. But I think that's a great sign that people are ready to suspend their sense of disbelief, that they'll kind of just take in the artwork and not think critically about maybe it isn't a real hamster, maybe it's actually just a video screen. So yeah, that's that piece. So yeah, even more animal empowerment art. So after that piece, I was thinking about what other things could I make, and similar to the duck piece that I showed like 2 pieces ago, like I mentioned that human beings spend a lot of time destroying waterways and fish habitats, so I thought it might be interesting to make a machine that allowed fish to destroy human habitats instead. So I thought, how could I give a goldfish the power to smash small human furniture? So I set out about making a machine that would allow a goldfish to control a hammer. The simple way to do this would be to have like a rectangular fish tank and a straight track in front of it. But when you're making art with technology, I think it's very easy to get distracted by the technical elements, which I think is something that you have to be very conscious of, that you don't spend so much time making the technical parts of your project beautiful that the end product is not beautiful. But anyway, I went down this rabbit hole of wanting to make a curved track around the fish tank that would allow the fish to smash stuff. So I started experimenting with different ways of doing this. At the time I was doing an art residency at Autodesk, and they had the crazy machine there called a water jet cutter. So I started cutting these curved tracks out of metal. This is my first prototype fish hammer actuation device. So this is what this water jet machine looks like. It's a pretty fun machine if you can ever get a chance to use one. It just blows sand and water out at really high pressure, and then it can cut through glass or marble or metal or anything. So this is what the half-assembled machine looked like. And so once I had decided how I was going to get the hammer to move, I needed to work out how I was going to be able to track the goldfish. And luckily for me, I realized that goldfish are quite brightly colored. What if I got a different colored gravel that was contrasting to the goldfish's color? So I went to the pet store and started looking for the most orange goldfish I could find. And after a while, the guy in the pet store got kind of annoyed with me. He was like, here's the net. You decide which fish you want, because he got bored of trying to find the most orange fish for me. Anyway, I got my fish, who still lives happily in San Francisco. And yeah, this is what this piece looked like once it was assembled. Piece was an interesting piece because I guess it destroyed itself over time. So whenever I've shown it, there needs to be someone in the gallery whose job it is to try and resurrect the furniture as best as possible at the end of every day. So there's a webcam above his tank that you can see here that's tracking the fish, and as the fish swims like around the tank, the hammer follows him. It's also interesting watching people watching this, some people aren't sure, or no one is sure of how conscious the fish is of what's happening. But it's very easy to start to believe the fish knows what's happening, and I've shown this a couple of times, once in Japan and once in America. And the Japanese fish seem to be a lot more into smashing stuff than the American fish. I'm not sure what that says about anything, but the American fish was pretty lazy, whereas the Japanese fish was like smash, smash, smash. Anyway, but again, I spent a lot of time over-engineering this, making this cool-looking actuator device, but the really important aspects of this piece were just the hammer and the fish, so it's good to be conscious about what are the important aspects of your artwork and just working on them. So, yeah. Again, like one of the biggest things that I got out of this was like, yeah, people are very ready to project onto fish and like believe that, you know, like it's really interesting playing with people's perceptions of animal intelligence. But yeah, did the fish know he was smashing stuff? Maybe, I don't know. But I also enjoyed working with hammers, so I started thinking about other ways I could work with hammers and make maybe something less destructive. And then I had an idea that it would be great to make a meditative piece that would allow, it would be a kinetic piece where hammers would move and light bulbs would move and they would just miss hitting each other. So you would get this kind of like meditative but also maybe slightly stressful at sometimes experience where these hammers and light bulbs were moving and just about missing each other. And I was also thinking about, at the time, I guess COVID has really shown us how fragile a lot of the systems that we have faith in are. Our like supply chains, you know, are just resting on a knife edge. So the idea of this piece was to create a piece that was, an artistic interpretation of that. A piece where these hammers and light bulbs would like work in unison as long as every part of the machine I built was working. But if any part of the machine were to go wrong, then yeah, the machine would start malfunctioning and light bulbs would start to be smashed. So I hope that doesn't happen because the piece is going to be permanently installed somewhere. So I hope one day it's going to be on the ceiling. So I hope one day it doesn't start to rain down broken glass. But this piece was originally commissioned for this church here. So this was another interesting challenge, trying to think of different materials I could use to make the piece work in this environment. Obviously, it's like a pretty crazy environment. It's in Portugal, so I guess in the olden times they used to bring back a lot of gold, and then they're like, what do we do with all this gold? So it's, yeah, pretty crazy. So I started experimenting with different ways I could arrange the hammers in software, and came up with a few different ideas, and this was the one I settled on in the end. So then I had to work out how it was going to interact with the light bulb. So originally the design process was all just like working out the motion, and then I had to try and translate this into a mechanical motion. So then I came up with a few different prototype ideas, and this was like the prototype that ended up working the best. So prototyping is really useful when you're creating artwork, especially mechanical artwork, because there's lots of things in the physical world that happen that you don't really anticipate until you've put everything together. So anyway, this is what this final piece looked like. So no sound, but anyway, the sound is just music, but you get the idea. But so I think this is an old edit with no music, and anyway, sorry about that. There was only one motor powering this whole thing. There's no microcontrollers or anything in this, so that was a nice challenge for me, trying to give myself this constraint of removing all the electronics and just making something as simple as possible. And I think it achieved my intended goal. There was like quite a few people who would like sit and stare at this thing in the church for like 15 minutes. So it was really nice to be able to create a piece that was intended to be meditative, that's put in a location where people often go to contemplate life. But that piece was about global supply chains and, obviously the weaknesses that have been exposed by the last couple of years. But a lot of the stuff that global supply chains ship around the world ends up here in the rubbish. So a lot of times in my work, I like to try and upcycle, reuse, and abuse trash, because when you're making art with technology, it's often very tempting to try and use the newest, shiniest toys all the time. But also as an artist, you have the power to hack and use and abuse technology as you want. So you can take a piece of technology from 20 years ago and repurpose it to make it something new. And so this next project I'm going to show you is one of my first art projects I made, and I was thinking about ways I could upcycle and reuse mobile phones. Everyone has a few mobile phones lying around in their drawers that they've forgotten about and they never use. So we've got as many mobile phones from our friends as we could, and we started to think about what makes a mobile phone a mobile phone. And one of the things that we kept coming back to was the kind of high-pitched intrusive noises. So we started to think about when high-pitched intrusive noises might be welcome in people's lives, and came to the idea of birdsong. So we put all these ideas together and decided to make some robotic birds out of mobile phones. So here's what some of these birds look like. So as I say, this was one of my first ever art and technology projects. So this was very much hot glued together. I highly advise against using hot glue for final projects that you're going to leave in a gallery somewhere, because you will end up with lots of phone calls telling you your project is falling to pieces. This is version 2, which had screws in it. And here's a video of this piece. So as I say, this was one of the first art and technology projects I ever made, and at the time I didn't really realize the importance of documentation. A lot of times the way people are going to be experiencing your work is online, so it's really, really valuable to be able to capture your work well, and it doesn't even have to be that much effort. Nowadays everyone has a smartphone, and smartphones have super high-res cams. So I think for me it's just, getting a tripod is a good idea, and also videoing stuff when the piece is on location so that you're not trying to recreate people's reactions to it. It's really nice to be able to capture genuine reactions to your art if you can. So that piece was shown in a museum, and that worked great. And then I had to show it underground. And so that the way that piece worked was you would have multiple birds in this tree, and you would call them, and then they would like answer the phone, and then they would flap around and then hang up on you and phone other birds. But then I had to show it in a basement where there was no phone reception, so I came up with this other system that would use an old school phone, and they would all be connected over the Ethernet. So it made perfect sense to me, and then the opening night went really well, but then I started getting lots of calls from the gallery like straight after that saying the piece is broken, you need to come fix it. So basically what was happening is kids were coming in and they had never seen a phone like that before, and they didn't know how to use it, so they were just breaking it. And I think it's really interesting comment on user interface design. Like, to me, that seems like an obvious user interface, but to a kid who's grown up without that, that's completely foreign. And I think we think about the technology we use today in the same way. Like, we think about swiping and tapping and mouses and trackpads as completely intuitive. We forget that they're completely learned interfaces. So I think as artists, it's really interesting to be thinking about and exploring what other ways we might be able to interact with technology outside of these interfaces that we've learned is the way we interact with the digital world. Well, one nice thing about this piece was the way that rather than using CAD like I normally do, where everything's very dictated by the computer, we just had a palette of trash, a palette of junk, and we were just experimenting physically with how you can make bird-like structures out of these phones. So I think it's good, as much as possible to try and, if you're making physical work, to try and prototype physically. Because as soon as you go into computer land, the computer's going to guide you down a certain path. All of these software tools we use definitely push you in certain directions. So that piece was about phones, and another piece I made about phones was related to all of these assistants that we have, like digital assistants like Cortana and Siri and Google Home. They're all listening to us all the time, and we kind of take them for granted as friends when they're not really friends at all. They're big corporations spying on us. So here's a piece that a couple of artists, Bjorn Carmen and Tore Knudsen, made, which was a comment on that. You put it over your Google Home, and then your Google Home will only listen to you when you say a certain keyword, and the rest of the time your Google Home is shut off from the world, so that it's not spying on you. So that's an interesting artistic intervention there. And I decided I wanted to make a piece that was going to be a projection piece that would show your words entering cyberspace. So rather than just your words disappearing to this digital device and you imagining you're talking to a friend or something that would show the data that was actually disappearing from your grasp, and maybe have some element which would like kind of use and abuse your words. So the element which I decided to abuse your words with this robotic foot. So here's a prototype that I made for that piece, and then this is what this final piece looked like.
Hello. Are you listening to me?
So basically every time you speak to it, your words become part of the projection, and if your words
coffee shop.
touch the foot, they get kicked across the installation, and if they go into the tube on the right, they get sucked back out into the real world of sound. So again, I really like this idea of thinking about different ways of combining the physical and the digital, using these kind of tubes as prompts to prompt people's brains into thinking, oh yeah, I understand that this is a path for sound to travel to and from the installation with. Another nice thing about this was it created like a social space. Like a lot of times we're going to social spaces now and we're not even, like as I mentioned earlier, we're not experiencing each other. We're experiencing and mediating our experiences through these devices. So it's nice to use digital devices to create a social space. When that piece I showed before was up in an exhibition, you would get people, like interacting with each other, trying to work out different ways of breaking it, or trying to fill it, make poems together, or trying to fill it with swear words. But you would get these kind of group dynamics, and I think it's really nice to be able to use digital technology to bring people together rather than just force them into this kind of single-user screen-based interaction. And again, that piece for the first version, I tried to find some trash that I could use to make the physical elements. So there was a guy I found near Los Angeles who used to run a brass factory. He found an old brass factory, getting rid of all of their items, and so he had all of these crazy items, like crazy old brass instruments. So I got some of that trash from him and made it into that piece. But another experience I had with trash, probably my best trash experience, was when I did a art residency in San Francisco at the dump there. So they let you go to this place in the dump and just take whatever you want to make art out of. So it's not the part of the rubbish dump where people take food and stuff. It's just the part where people drop off their own stuff, like furniture and stuff. So this was in San Francisco, so there was lots of crazy stuff. This was my studio after 2 weeks. There was computers and 3D printers and fish tanks, and yeah, it's a really interesting way to make art, because you have all of these different objects with different meanings in your brain, and you can just arrange them together and like try and build pieces around these weird interplays that you don't expect. So one thing I found in the trash was someone's collection of umbrellas. There was like 50 umbrellas, so I started to think about pieces I could make out of that. And obviously climate change is affecting the weather in lots of different ways, so I was like, what if climate change means it stops raining in some places? So I decided to make an umbrella that would allow you to make it rain instead of protecting you from rain. So I started experimenting with these umbrellas and trying to work out ways that you could make an umbrella rain on the inside. So I became quite good at umbrella surgery, and then designed this extra umbrella part that I 3D printed that will allow you to pump water into the top of the umbrella, and then water would come out the bottom of the umbrella. So that's what this looked like, and here's some more umbrella surgery. So as I say, I did this piece in a rubbish dump. So you're meant to use all of your materials are meant to be found in the rubbish. And that meant all the plumbing as well wasn't quite right, because it was only plumbing supplies I could find in the trash. So it meant the plumbing didn't quite work right. And then one day there was a kid who was like on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. And one of the pipes burst and sprayed water all over the gallery. So that was an interesting experience. Another thing I found in the trash was this mirror, and it seemed kind of cool, and I started thinking about things I could do with that. And rather than a vanity mirror, I decided to make an AntiVanity Mirror, so they would train people to not look at themselves in the mirror. It's kind of like the ideal mirror for your influencer friend, I guess, if you want to train them to not be so into selfies. I also found this in the trash, a 3D printer, and I decided I was going to use that to make the mirror move left and right, but I didn't need it to move in 3 dimensions, so I chopped it in half and made it into a 1D printer. 3D printers, most of them have like microcontrollers in them, very similar to Arduino, so I had to hack the software inside the 3D printer, and then like after I did all of that, this is the piece I came up with. So you would go and look at the mirror, and then the mirror would attempt to run away from you. I guess some people were super into this project because like when I took it down after the first exhibition, there were like lip marks and nose marks on the mirror, so I guess some people really like themselves. So yeah. Another thing I found in the trash when I was like at the rubbish dump was all of this kind of 80s furniture, and I thought it might be cool to try and make some kind of like 80s musical living room. So every living room needs a TV, and so I found this TV and I smashed it up, and then I put an LCD screen in it, and I thought it would be okay. I'm gonna then play visuals on the screen, but then it just looked like a smashed up TV with an LCD screen in it. So then back to the rubbish dump, and then I found this actual functioning TV. I found these old shoes. I found this stack of National Geographic, so I'm like, okay, maybe I can take them apart and make them into a percussive element. I found an old Mac, so that was what I used to like sequence the music. So this is Logic, and some Arduinos you can make look like an audio interface, so I found an Arduino Due in the trash also, and then I was connecting Logic to different elements I found in the trash via an Arduino, and so yeah, this is what this final piece looked like.
Well, as promised,
Maybe I'll fast forward this video a little bit because it's quite long, and you can the whole video is on my website.
Take an umbrella or take a raincoat. You'll probably need it.
So that piece was like a mixture of synthesized sounds and motor sounds and water sounds. So yeah, that was a fun project, and it was nice to have a piece that people would come and they could actually sit inside the living room and experience it. Another musical piece I made was when I was approached by the printer company called Brother. They wanted an ad, and they wanted us to make a printer orchestra. So this is something that's been done before. Plenty of people have made printer orchestras over the years. And normally I don't like doing stuff that people have done before, but I guess this seemed like an area that was ripe enough for this exploration that it would be a fun process. So the two devices that we decided to make music with were this thing on the left, a stepper motor, and this thing on the right, which is a car door lock actuator. So a stepper motor, if you step it at the same frequency as a musical note, it'll play that musical note, and a car door lock actuator is a cheap way to make a pretty strong percussive instrument. So this is the first prototype we came up with for this. So yeah, our neighbors in our studio were not too impressed by this project. I guess motors don't have a volume control on them, so yeah, there was nothing we could really do to make them quieter. Once we had done our first few prototypes and experiments, we made this printed circuit board, because if you're going to have a technology project which involves a lot of electronics, it's really useful to create printed circuit boards, and nowadays you can get something made super cheaply, like $10 or $20 if you send it off to China and wait a couple of weeks. So yeah, if you're making a project that has a lot of wiring, it's definitely worth thinking about. The composition process for this was quite interesting because we were trying to make lots and lots of instruments out of printers. We would the person in charge of composing wouldn't know exactly what noise the instruments would have made until we had built them. So we'd build the instrument, record it, and then send it to the composer, and then he would try and integrate it into the composition. But we didn't really know until the final day what it was going to sound like. So this is the setup process. So this was an ad, and the production agency only hired the studio for 2 days, which wasn't really enough. It was a pretty crazy setup, and I didn't sleep that much. We decided, because it was an artwork based around trash, it would be good to use power supplies we found in the trash as well. That turned out to be a really bad idea because the power supply started exploding on the set, so we had to run to an electronics store and buy some newer power supplies. But yeah, after that kind of crazy non-sleep setup day, this is what I look like. It was not fun, but in the end it all worked out together, and this is what the final piece looked like. So that piece, yeah, it worked really well in the end. But then we would show it to people, and they would be like, "Yeah, that's great computer graphics, guys." And we were like, "No, it really happened." So we tried really hard to get the advertising agency to give us the money to do it in a real space so people could go and experience it, but they didn't come up with the money in the end. So I think when you're building stuff like this, it's always good to try and think about ways to, explore ideas to their full potential. Let people experience it if they can. But again, after this, I was thinking about other ways I could make music with stepper motors, and I found some My Little Ponies in a market near my house and decided that might be a good thing to make music with. So like I made this little device here. So the brother piece I showed you before, I guess, had a budget of hundreds of times this, but this piece I think has more hits on Vimeo than the brother piece I just showed. So you don't need a big budget necessarily to have a successful art piece. So yeah, you get the idea there. So I think what I want to leave you with is basically, when you're trying to combine art and technology and use technology to create interesting creative experiences, is to like just think about new ways of combining things together, create unique experiences, and also both use things that are already out there, build on the work of other people, but also share your own work. So like I put things on Instructables and on GitHub. This might be the only Instructable that you can both electrocute and cut yourself at the same time making. This is, I try and share all of my code on GitHub, the useful stuff anyway. And thank you for listening to my talk.
Ok, no sé si hay preguntas. Si alguien quiere preguntar algo. Sí.
Hi, Neil.
Hi.
Do you usually work alone, or do you have a team?
It depends. A lot of projects I work alone, like the printer project. It was with a I had a company in London with some friends, so that was a team. Some of the a lot of the design and programming I'll do on my own. Sometimes I'll send stuff out to be fabricated, so get other people to like CNC or waterjet cut stuff. I need to get better at working with other people, because trying to do everything on your own is very time consuming, but mainly on my own most of the time.
¿Algo más?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Neil. It was such an interesting talk. I would like to ask you, what are some of your inspirations? Like, what people inspire you, or what are some of your sources of inspiration?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess a lot of people working with art and technology today, obviously there's like a lot of people making awesome stuff, like Daito Manabe and Carl McDonald and Zach Lieberman, just like there's a big group of people making awesome work today. But I guess surrealism I enjoy looking at. I mean, I also just enjoy walking around art museums. Like, I guess 20th century contemporary art is also a big source of inspiration. Like James Turrell and Yayoi Kusama, and there's I guess I wouldn't say I have any specific sources of inspiration. Normally when I'm like trying to think of new projects, so I just try and keep my mind open to inspiration coming from anywhere. So this could be like walking around a forest, or looking at an art around an art museum, or also just talking to people. Like, I think being in a school situation like this is super valuable. You don't realize it until you're not in it anymore, but having a community around you that you can discuss ideas with is really useful. So if you have ideas about what you want to do with your projects, it's worth discussing them with your friends here.
Thank you.
Hi. When you use so many recycled things like trash and stuff and electronic pieces, the aesthetics of your work are dependent on what you find and the electronic pieces. What do you find that they are beautiful for you, or what aesthetic do you like what you finally make up?
I mean,
Or-
so like one of some of the pieces I showed there I made at a residency was at a rubbish dump. So there's like there's a crazy amount of stuff there. So it's like that's also down to your curation of the stuff you find. But I guess in some of the projects I was guided by the stuff I found. Like, I kept finding this kind of like 80s fake wood stuff, which kind of led to the musical living room. So it's not an aesthetic that I would normally work with, but because the materials were guiding me in that direction, it seemed like something that would be good to create an immersive experience with. I think also when you're using stuff like old technology like printers, especially slightly older people have like a nostalgic relationship with those kind of objects, kind of like dot matrix printers that are kind of like off-white and make a loud sound. So people like have an emotional connection to them that they don't have to current technology. Like, obviously this is like utilitarian. Everyone has a smartphone in their pocket, but if you show this to someone in 20 or 30 years time, they'll be like, oh, I remember those, that's cool. So it's like, I think using technology gives you this like instant nostalgia connection to people. But it's different with every project as to like the aesthetic, and sometimes I guess I'm looking for a certain type of thing, and other times I'm guided by what I find. So it can work both ways.
¿Alguna más?
Hey, Neil.
Hi.
So when you talk about exploring ideas to their full potential and at the same time trying to bring some concepts down to earth so that they're not too spread out or hard to understand, like how do you go about toning down those concepts or when do you know the concept is strong enough that you can explore it further?
I mean, for me, like, I think the hardest part of my artistic process at the moment is the concept part, like, because it's very easy to come up with ideas based on the newest, shiniest technology. It's like, oh, a new VR headset's come out, I'll make a piece of that, or a new depth camera. But I think I guess I try and start with ideas, and I guess I'll have the seed of an idea, and then I'll start playing with it and see, because you can also overthink things. So, like the hamster-powered hamster drawing machine, I showed that originally I was like interested in these kind of drawing machines with mechanically encoded drawings. So I made one of those first, and like sometimes the ideas will come like through a process of iteration, and but I find like actually working with my hands and building stuff will like open my ideas to ways that I might complete the seed of an idea I've got. So like, just make a little prototype, and then you'll be like, oh, now I could do this or that, and then so that's just my personal way of working. But I find like if I have a seed of concept, it's good to make a prototype and just see where it goes, and eventually I think you sit with it for a while, and eventually you're like, okay, now this seems good. But I think it's good just to get your hands dirty sometimes and try stuff out rather than overthinking things.
¿Más? ¿No? ¿A la de una? No? Okay, doncs, thanks, Neil. We finish here. Okay.
Thank you for coming to listen to me.
Congratulations for your work.
Thanks.